Welsh rabbit, the poached egg on top, please. Not too runny. And bacon, scones, butter, cream, jam, not strawberry. Welcome, everyone, to the 706 podcast, breakfast edition. This time, our topic is the Phantom Thread, also known as Paul Thomas Anderson 5, the Phantom Thread. I am here. I am your host, Connor, and I am here with my co-hosts, my three movie fiends, my companions. Please, would you guys introduce yourselves? Let's go around the room. How about Tony?
I'm Tony, and I'd like a Big Mac, a 10-piece nuggets, a large shamrock shake, and whatever else. Like, I used to do a whole thing. I can't remember all of them, but yeah, I'm Tony.
And Anthony?
I'm Anthony, and I'll take a grande black coffee with a 1 cube of ice.
And Kirk?
Hey, Lenny, what the fuck are scones? Do we have any of those? This ordered scones. Why don't you spit in his food?
It was tough to nail that vowel, Kirk. Scones. It was tough to do. But thank you guys for your breakfast orders. We're working on that right away. The topic today, The Phantom Thread by Paul Thomas Anderson, his latest, and Daniel Day-Lewis's last. Obviously, we talked a little bit about Paul Thomas Anderson. Certainly among us as kind of movie buffs, we definitely give PTA a lot of play. Certainly a lot of us hold his movies in high regard. I personally, obviously think about There Will Be Blood as one of my favorite movies of all time. But this is a movie that, just as I've watched it more and more, has grown more and more in my estimation. Let's just say briefly what it's about. It's about our wonderfully named protagonist, Reynolds Woodcock, who is a fashion designer presiding over a house, kind of like fashion house, right? Designer, maker of, haute couture, and his relationship to Alma. It's sort of a story of their relationship and the sort of shifting dynamic in their relationship. It's kind of, again, like There Will Be Blood, like The Master. It's a story of power, right? Power in relationship, even when this is taken to extremes and becomes almost pathological. Let's get into the impressions, guys. I know for almost all of you, I think all of you, this is not your first time watching, but just having watched it this time around, what did you make of it? What are your thoughts? Anyone want to go first?
I can go, I suppose.
Yeah, Tony.
So Connor and I actually saw this movie in the theater at the Alamo Draft House in Brooklyn when it was out. So I saw this movie twice in theaters, and this is my third time seeing it. So it's been a number of years. I was kind of due to revisit it, and I certainly liked it when it was out. But this movie, I mean, there's a lot of amazing things about it, right? Obviously, you have the performances, mainly Daniel Day-Lewis. I mean, Daniel Day-Lewis is always, knocks it out of the park. And I love Reynolds Woodcock and the way he brings him to life. I mean, he's such an original creation. I feel like, There Will Be Blood as a counterpoint is such a big, operatic, larger than life performance. And, Woodcock is a much more subtle, much more reserved, much more kind of finely drawn character, I guess. And he's kind of similar. Daniel Lewis is operating in a similar mode to he was in The Age of Innocence. I think that's the closest other performance of his I would compare it to. But Woodcock is very much his own creation, his own character, and he is very particular. There's a lot of great little moments in the performance, a lot of great little gestures, a lot of great little looks, just the way he walks around, and it feels so human. It feels so real. Just this man who is a genius, a master at what he does, and who is obsessed with control, who's obsessed with living his life in this very, very particular way. And if any instability is brought in, if any changes are brought in, he just cannot handle it. And he needs things to be the right way. And he's basically, I think Alma even calls him at one point, he's a giant baby. He's like a baby man. He's like a little petulant child when he doesn't get his way. And it's such a perfect performance because we understand his psychology. We understand why he is the way he is, and we can predict how he's going to react in different situations, more or less. That is the first thing you notice. Obviously, this movie has what might be my favorite score of all time. The most angry I've ever been at the Oscars, and it still stings, is when The Shape of Water beat this for Best Original Score. I was so pissed. I'm like, how? I can't even remember any of the music from The Shape of Water. I'm sure it's fine, but like, oh, Anthony's shaking his head at me. But like, I can't. I'm sorry. Like, it still makes me mad. The score is stunning by Johnny Greenwood of Radiohead, who's worked with PTA a couple times now, and it's just beautiful. I'm not a well versed in like classical music or the styles he's operating in, but there's kind of jazzy moments. There's a lot of piano, there's a lot of strings, and it's just like beautiful. And I think that what Paul S. Anderson does most successfully in this movie is create this beautiful kind of dream world between the music and just the cinematography that is gorgeous. I mean, this is one of the best looking movies ever. I mean, this is just like, it looks closest to The Master in terms of comparing it to other PTA movies. Like, that's the aesthetic kind of mode he's in. A lot of like really bright lighting. The faces in this movie look so different. Like, you can see every pore, and just like the level of detail on the faces is really remarkable. And I'm not sure technically how he gets them to look the way they do. And if you've seen the movie, you know what I'm talking about. And The Master was the exact same way. But yes, there's something very beautiful about the faces, the production design above and beyond what you would expect. You know, just a stunning, every frame, absolutely gorgeous. Even like small things we only see for a second, you know, are just so like beautifully layered. The colors, the wallpaper, it's all amazing. I mean, it just aesthetically, this movie is pristine in terms of visuals, in terms of sound, in terms of performance. All those technical details are perfect. I will say though that unlike Connor, this is one of those PTA movies that, again, it's my third time watching it, and I don't necessarily feel like on successive viewings I've gotten more out of it than I did on my first viewing, because I watched it the first time and I liked it quite a bit, and I still like it. And I think it's very chewy. There's a lot of great little moments, a lot of great little scenes. I do think this movie is saying something kind of interesting about relationships. I think it's a much better relationship movie than Punch Drunk Love. I think it's a more honest movie. It's a more interesting movie, grappling with this idea of like kind of the icky parts of intimacy and what does it truly mean to share a life with someone, to be intimate with someone, right? Which I think is really cool and really interesting. But I guess to me, like, I kind of got that on the first viewing, and subsequent viewings have not really revealed more to it, I guess, which maybe there are things I'm missing. In fact, I'm sure there are things I'm missing. So while I'm still pretty positive on the movie, I can't quite say it's in my top tier of PTA.
Sure. Thank you, Tony. Yeah, it's interesting. No, I think I see what you mean. I find I discovered more, but is it in the same sense of revisiting The Master, where I felt like I had a puzzle to unravel and I felt like I learned just a little bit more every time I watched it? No, I can't say it's quite the same. I think there's more. It's all of it's kind of more on the table. I think I'd agree with you there, though I wouldn't call that a knock against it, but then I'm sure you have other reasons too for not putting it on the top of the canon. My own feelings are complicated. But how about Anthony? Would you like to give your impressions this time around?
Sure. So, well, let's start by saying that Alexander Desplat's score for The Shape of Water is excellent. I was perfectly fine.
I don't remember it either, honestly.
I actually listen to it all the time and own it. So I love it. It's a fantastic score. This one's really great too, and I wouldn't have minded if it won. But anyway, so this is my second time seeing it. Last time I saw it was when it came out in theaters. So it's been some time. It's been several years. And I'm a little scrambled because I'm still very positive on it, but I have so many thoughts running in all sorts of directions. But I think I got to say is, like The Phantom Pain or like Phantom Hourglass, I think Phantom Thread is a very, very well done, very misunderstood movie. I think one thing we got to admit, and you brought this up at the beginning, Connor, is how PTA is definitely a filmmaker that we've talked about quite a bit, especially off this podcast. And I think I even forgot how much we talked about him off, because I remember thinking we had brought up some of his other films in discussion for the podcast and we hadn't. But in some ways, I feel like Phantom Thread is PTA sort of reconciling a bit of his reputation as a sort of a guy filmmaker. I think that there's a certain online, probably film Twitter presence that's very heavily male for PTA, of course, especially things like There Will Be Blood, Boogie Nights, and probably The Master. I don't know how fully true that is, but I get the sense that would probably be the case. And so I think when Phantom Thread comes along, it becomes a very obvious depiction for a lot of people of the sort of toxic male type artists that they like to make fun of, especially nowadays. But on this rewatch, I really got those sort of echoes of other films that I think PTA really brings in so brilliantly. Echoes of, Hitchcock, not just because, her name is Alma, like Hitchcock's wife, and Hitchcock is a famously, obsessive artist, but the way the film plays, like Rebecca or Marnie or something, and the way the sort of beautiful house, which I assume is in London, or is almost entrapping them more and more until they wind up in the basement. Which is another thing to say is I actually forgot how this movie ends, because in my memory I had it ending right when she feeds him the mushrooms and they kind of stare at each other, and I forgot there's like that extra 2 to 3 minute kind of a monologue she gives, which has a very interesting line about how when she is loving him, and there's no mystery to life or something along those lines.
Life is simple.
Yeah, life, there's
life has no
mystery. And it's so interesting to hear that, right? Because normally in our version of love is, the sort of idea that you could conquer any sort of mystery, at least in the sort of grand, literary or artistic sense. But here it's played out in a different way. And it reminded me of 45 Years was probably my closest thematic comparison that I know we all know of. Because in 45 Years, we often talked about the fear of going through your whole life with someone and realizing you never know them. But in this case, I think as we watch the movie, the more we see the relationship play out, and it's something PTA does in like The Master, but the more we see the relationship play out, I think the more we realize as an audience that we don't know these people at all. And I think that's actually the brilliant part of the film is we become sort of obsessed with how little these people are sort of engaged in themselves and how much they have to fear if there is any sense of mystery. And I think that's kind of an interesting thing I was thinking about here. So hopefully that made sense. I'm still trying to wrap my head around it, but very positive takeaway. I thought there was just so much, and I forgot about the mom scene too, and the ghost. How what's the line is I have no fear of the dead being here, or something along those lines. It's so interesting, but
I don't find it spooky. Yeah,
sort of hot couture gothic nature of this film is interesting. But I'll let Kirk go.
Oh yeah, there's so much to comment on, but let's let Kirk have his say.
All right. So this is my second viewing. I chose this film, which Connor nominated. I feel like watching this film is akin to listening to Enya. Ultimately, it's quite nice, soothing. There's beautiful melodic moments, but its facade is crumbling before my eyes, at least a little bit. I think I agree with Anthony that I think this choice by PTA was a little compensatory in the sense that it felt like he was trying to rebalance his image or the range that he felt he was being perceived of having. Yeah, I have mixed feelings about the film. I didn't feel any strong emotion while watching this movie, really. Like, I felt there was always a disconnect, and I think that's due to the copious yet admittedly intentional amounts of pretense throughout the film. And I think that the best scene of the film is when she makes him dinner near the middle, and they get into a large fight, and they're actually expressing themselves openly. And she's like kind of at a loss for words with how to describe how just completely insane and repressed he is, and fragile and petulant. And it's like, yeah, I agree with you. And she really is at a loss for words. And that's kind of how I feel at times while watching this film. Like, I worry that had this been made by another director, we wouldn't hold it in as high esteem. That's kind of a classic contrarian line or hook But I don't know. Man, the relationship's there. I don't truly understand why she loves him so much. The only thing there for me is that she is in love with his work. She objectifies him just as much as he objectifies her. And so it causes this kind of dissonance and hypocrisy to kind of pervade the whole film and cloud her. She's supposed to kind of be our moral compass throughout, where it's like she's guiding the relationship in a fair and just way, right? And we're supposed to kind of empathize with her lack of intimacy, with her inability to kind of connect to Reynolds in a true, vulnerable, intimate way. And yet I feel like the whole kind of foundation of the relationship is flawed to begin with. So I feel like she's just as full of shit as he is. But it's so well acted, it's so well shot. The score is incredible. It's like everything about it is so great, except for me, I guess, how it's written and how much meat there is on the bones. I really don't think there's a grand amount, right? Like, I think the master is just leagues above this film, like leagues above this film. And maybe that's because I'm a simpleton, right? I could very well be. I'm admitting that. It could be that I am kind of just a facile human being, and like I respond more positively to dramatic shifts in emotion and human tension, right? But even a movie like Age of Innocence, I found, is very similar. There's kind of a chorality there in a way, and I found to be much more drawn to the Age of Innocence in that film, because I felt like I could feel his motivations a little bit more. This character Reynolds is not very. He's so detached from reality that it's hard at times to kind of look at him and with anything other than just amusement, right? It's so hard to empathize with him at times, except if you take like just broad strokes. Like he likes to be in control. Like he prefers a routine. He's engrossed in his craft, right? And a final point I was thinking is, this movie, it's very pleasing to watch, right? It's kind of like, like the Bourne films where we see Jason Bourne do a bunch of stuff and we love it because it's like, oh, that's so cool. He's so good at this. Like, I think there's part of that where it's like, oh, these people are so cultured and so refined. I respect that. And him being a fashion designer, is a seamster a word? I know seamstress is a word. I don't know what you would call him, but I guess a fashion designer. But
he's not doing the seam string.
Yeah, he's not.
With only seamstress, no seamsters.
He's not doing all the sewing. He's doing some of the sewing. He sews in the little messages into his works. But I wish there was more of the craft in the film, because there's allegorical intent there with the phantom thread, right? And we kind of can play with that a little bit, but we see him take her measurements, and we see him touching and rearranging, and it's like, let's see a little more of how brilliant you are. Like, let's see that in the film. Like, give us a little bit more of that. I'm trying to think of other movies where it's easier to kind of understand a tortured genius when you see how brilliant they are, not just when you're told about how brilliant they are. Kind of like a Whiplash, or I can't really. I'm stumbling to pull something off the top of my head, but does anybody else relate to the idea that, like, it's kind of ineffable, his genius, and we're not really.
I actually kind of like that. I kind of wouldn't want a bunch of scenes of like, wow, you designed this masterful dress in one night, Mr. Woodcock, or just sort of, not that you're saying that's what it would be, but like, I don't know. I kind of like that him being a genius is almost like taken for granted. It's just, you're getting a window into this man's life. This is a guy who's at the top of this profession, and he's still like really anal and really weird, and he doesn't seem particularly like happy. He seems like kind of unsatisfied and like needs things to be just right. And I kind of like, that to me feels more real than there being, because we can see that he's good at what he does, right? Clearly he's good at what he does. Look at the dresses, look at the people he's bringing in, look at the people who are buying them, like look at all the money, look at all the, so it, like, I think you understand that, like, this is the world he's in, that he couldn't be here without some kind of a genius, right? He has to be, and I think that the movie isn't really about that, I guess. So I don't really agree with that. I also do find him relatable in a bad way. I think I am like this guy in certain ways. Like, I feel like I'm just like when they're eating breakfast or whatever, or like stuff like that. And I'm just like, I'm sure my girlfriend sees me as this guy sometimes, like just being really like fussy and really anal and like, no, it has to be just like this, or no, we have to do this, we can't do that, or no, I don't want to go to the New Year's Eve ball, and just like, I don't know. I find that stuff very relatable personally.
Yeah, I just think it's such an obscure choice for like a film to be about a fashion. We don't see it very often, so it's like I wish I saw a little bit more, right? I wish I had a little bit more there, because kind of the moment to moment, like, it's not I don't know, it's not exactly that entertaining for me to watch him fuss over dresses. Can I be brutally, I'm being brutally honest here, and it's I'm gonna out myself as a layman, but it's not very entertaining to watch a bunch of old ladies. So like, I just wanted a little bit more of like a granular element there to kind of justify the choice of his profession, like, because otherwise I think he could have done well as a sculptor or a painter or something, where we would have seen it. We would have, I guess we see his dresses, but do any of you have any interpretations of any of his dresses that I would like to hear? Because I sure as hell don't understand fashion in that way. So I guess I'm outing myself, and I'm being a little bit of a Scrooge, but I would say that Alma carries this film as a character, not as an actor. I think Daniel Day-Lewis is the ultimate, obviously, in this alpha in this film, but and Cyril as well. But for me, it's a little bit of a mixed bag, and it's a shame. I don't know what's missing for me. Perhaps it just isn't for me. That's also a thing. But yeah, that's all I'll say for now. And this is a classic Kirk trajectory, so where my vote's going. But I'll just lay out all my grievances now. The litany, and this is like some sort of like a Romanian funeral. Like, this guy, he was a real schlub. He was a jack off. He slept with my wife. Let's send him to heaven. So yeah.
I didn't know that's what a Romanian funeral was, Kirk. That's a good new term that I've learned. Kirk, thank you. And here's what I'm going to say. The very thing everyone loves to hear. Kirk, all of your criticisms of the movie are true. But that's exactly why it's great. Okay? And I disagree with Tony in some of his descriptions, some of his pushback to your critiques. Because I think, let's be honest, no, we don't learn much about what Reynolds does. And I don't think we even need to think his dresses are nice at all. In fact, other people have pointed out, and the more I watch this movie, the more I realize his dresses are kind of whack. They're kind of weird looking. They're not that flattering. I think there's something to this movie where I think you may be missing something if you think Reynolds is a genius. Though, of course, okay, the fact that he is a genius and is seen as a genius is essential to the plot of the movie. We can't deny that. The fact that Alma seems to look upon him and admire him, worship him almost as a genius, seems to be part of the story, right? But I would mention some things that, sort of speak against that. Notice that all of his best clients, he has this kind of personal relationship with, and sometimes it's strongly implied to have been romantic relationships. I think Reynolds is not exactly like the pure man of craft that we would like to think he is, and perhaps he may even think he himself is. Though I think maybe he too has a kind of guilt and maybe his own kind of insecurity. I think obviously when we're talking about the Phantom Thread, we're talking about the construction, obviously everything, and I like the elegance of this movie, right? In that all of these things kind of point back and kind of serve the form. In other words, what am I trying to say, right? The fact that we have this setting, the 1950s, this time of class, notions still floating around of genius, of the genius artist, right? Certainly this male domination and female domesticity, right, sort of heightens these themes. And certainly, I don't think there's any denying that there's an element of metafilmic commentary, right, on the Phantom Thread and the creation of these pieces of art, these artworks, right, these dresses, right, that it too, right, is a kind of metafilmic thing. I know it's a bit trite, but I think it is there. And I think kind of the point is to not make too much of that fact. Because I think what this movie is all about is the fact that art is by no means all encompassing. Okay, this is being presented as art to us. Sure, it's all encompassing in that sense. But there's something that's much more powerful than art, which is food, right? And I can get more into that, right? But I think clearly there's a contrast between, on the one hand, Reynolds, the sort of artist, and I think the meaningfulness of his art is questioned at many points, but it is art nonetheless, right? Contrasted with Alma, who is, like, as her name kind of suggests, the alma mater, the nourishing one, right? The person who feeds, right? Who ultimately has more power in the relationship from the very get-go. And I think, as Tony pointed out, right, the fact that Reynolds is a boy, he's a very old boy with gray hair, right? I think that's kind of key to the relationship. I don't think it's because he's a genius that Alma loves him, though that's part of their negotiation. I think it's instead that she can in some ways own him, right? Can somehow be complete. She could be completely his in the sense that he can also be completely hers. And I think that's kind of what's going on. And I think the movie is intentionally kind of misleading you. I think it's asking you to kind of see beyond, right? And to realize, because it's such a kind of tone shift when suddenly we're talking about mushrooms out of nowhere, right? It feels kind of surreal when the element of poison mushrooms, right, enters the film. I think it's supposed to feel like that. It's supposed to feel like a kind of intrusion of nature into this staid and artistic and oh so prettily constructed world, right? And I love that because that itself is it's a very PTA style theme, right? Where we have these kinds of staid and stoic scenes, these beautiful scenes, punctuated by these outbursts of kind of hideous and kind of ridiculous human emotion. And what I love most about this movie is the writing, though I can't knock the cinematography at all. This is a movie that makes me laugh. Every time I get to the asparagus scene, I laugh. It's so funny and sick and awful and twisted and human, but somehow it's mostly funny. Like, are you an agent sent here to ruin my evening and possibly my entire life? Who sent you? Do you have a gun? Do you have a gun? And constantly saying, do you have a gun? Do you have a gun? The writing, right? And I think the whole staidness and kind of coldness and sort of prissy poshness of the movie, it kind of serves the purpose of underscoring those kind of hilariously human and kind of ugly moments, I guess is what I would say. But I'm curious if anyone has any thoughts or rebuttals to what I'm saying, or if anything seems like it's kind of way off track. Or
let's stick real quick before you go on, because I want to hear more about the food and its intrusion as a form of nature type argument. But I want to stick, because Kirk also brought it up real quick, to the sort of idea of fashion as art and the idea of the genius in fashion. Because I think part of the move here, to sort of stray the line between what you two are saying and what Tony was defending, is that fashion, I think, more than any other form of art, particularly at this time, we have to remember this is the 1950s. That's before the mass era of fashion as we know it comes in the late 1960s. So it's the 1950s. High fashion, haute couture culture only exists for exclusively rich people in this kind of industry that he's working in. But I think part of the point, of course, too, is that what fashion is, more than any other art, is impossible to judge in the way that we can with even music, classical painting, even film. I mean, there's always, of course, that intangible element. But in regards to those other sort of fields where we could point to, some sort of degree of skill, some sort of degree of, human invention. Whereas fashion, though, seems so removed. It seems so, literal to its name. It's just fashionable. It's all about money, and it's all about a random moment of connection. And I think what's interesting, of course, is that, like, as Kirk had pointed out, he doesn't actually, sew any of the stuff himself outside of the little messages. So I think part of the idea, of course, is there's not only the disconnect between what's presented and what's presented elsewhere, but also the lack of connection between the guy who creates the dress and the people who actually carry it out, which seems quite interesting. And it's a collaborative moment. And of course, as we all know, as anyone who's ever looked at high fashion knows, is high fashion always looks ridiculous. That in some way, the value of high fashion is being impractical, because to wear high fashion, you have to have the money to basically afford to be impractical, which is why I love the scene where they steal the dress back, because it implies a moment of use, a use value to it, in the way that I think what you're getting at, Connor, like food always has. And that's what, of course, the interesting part about the mushroom is it should have a use, but its use is completely detrimental to how we think of food, which is just poisonous, disastrous, thing ready to happen.
Connor, I'm curious about what you said with regards to kind of her prescience and knowing that she would be able to own him or dominate him, have some sense of control that might contrast quite starkly with the greater societal norms. You saw that as her knowing that while they were courting? I thought, to me, and I must have missed it, or either it's something that you realize in retrospect. To me, I thought that developed later, but and she felt like there was some futility there in the early kind of setting. But I wanted, if you could just expand on that idea, I'd love to hear it.
It's tricky, Kirk. I would say you're right, in some ways it's a reaction, right? I think obviously Alma goes to, she goes beyond, right? Maybe there's a desire to begin with that's not necessarily pathological. It becomes, rather pathological and slightly sinister, right? Not completely. I think the movie obviously leaves us in a very awkward position of judging either of these characters by the end of the film. But obviously something is wrong. Clearly that seems to be kind of a reaction to her sense of growing powerlessness in the context of living in the house of Woodcock, right? And her feeling of marginalization within that structure. But I think there's some hints of that, right? And I guess when I say domination, it doesn't have to ultimately be completely sinister to begin with. I guess the perversity comes in the idea of the mushrooms, which is this kind of like anti-food, right? It's kind of this reversal of what you would expect, right? But again, that's kind of her ambition in some ways, right? Is to feed him in a sense, which is serving him. But I think, again, even the body language, I'm thinking of just that initial scene, even though, right, yes, she's the server, even though she trips at that first moment when they lock eyes, right? He's in this kind of inferior position, right? And I think that's played with a lot at other moments in the movie. So maybe I'm reading a bit too much into that, but I think that's kind of what I would think. I mean, I think that's what she wants, right? And in some ways, it's Reynolds pushing back, right, against that leads the plot to develop in a certain way. But I see it's not a perfect argument, Kirk, and I'm not sure exactly, because I think saying that it's a desire for domination in the beginning doesn't quite cut it, because that's distinct from her desire to really, cut him down to size, right? Later in the film.
That's fair.
Yeah, obviously the food, right, represents this kind of alternative, right? It runs from before, right? From obviously their first meeting is food centric, and obviously food comes up again and again throughout the film. And I think obviously there's a contrast between those two things. But yeah, sorry, I've kind of lost my train of thought.
I think the food is a good thing, because that's the thing that sticks with me is the food, because the food is so it's interesting, because the first scene where they meet, you have that amazing breakfast order. Now, when people ask me about my favorite breakfast movies, it's like, okay, we got Breakfast Club, Breakfast at Tiffany's, that one McDonald's VHS tape with Grimace and Ronald McDonald when they talked about the breakfast menu, and then Phantom Thread. It's a solid fourth place because of that first scene. or he's ordering the breakfast, but we don't actually see the breakfast. And it's like, man, like it sounds really good. And it's like, it's describing it so beautifully. And then you never actually see it. And then at the end, she's making this omelet, which is never described. She doesn't say, I'm making you an omelet. Or does she say that? I don't think she says it.
No.
But you see it and it's beautiful. You know, you see the mushrooms, which we know are poisonous, but they look delicious with all that butter and like, you know, and all, which she's been told not to add the butter. He doesn't like it with too much butter. And then she adds more butter. You know, she adds a second pat of butter into the pan, which I think is intentional. And the omelet looks great. It's a great omelet advertisement. I think that, you know, the product placement in this film is subtle, but well utilized. But I do think there's something interesting about that, is those kind of two poles, because, you know, again, like, because it's not like this movie has like food porn in it. There's not a lot of shots of food. It's just that last shot. And it's almost like a reveal. It's almost like but this is what you've been waiting for. And food is very, very sensual or very sexual. You know, I mean, it's very like the way he's making that order is very flirtatious, you know, and he just keeps adding on food, and he's like, and then I want, you know, some sausages, and then I want, or, you know, even some sausages, like a double entendre, right? He throws that in at the end. You know, so there's very clearly a sensuality to the food, and that's where they find kind of an excitement in each other, is with food. So, you know, what do you make of that? Is there something else? Because I feel like there has to be something more to it than that. I think that's kind of the most obvious reading, but obviously there's the poison, right? There's the darkness, the fact that, you know, it looks good, but you know it's dangerous. I mean, maybe that's it. Maybe it's like love is appealing, love is exciting, but it's also dangerous. I don't know. I mean, is there more to it than that, or how does this track for you under your reading of it?
I think what's interesting is, you know, in some way, all three of you have said that you don't really, or that you sort of understand, but you maybe don't understand like her sort of fascination for him or her interests. But I think you got to pull out for a moment and zoom it back at the kind of scale the movie presents, because it's so interesting to me is she's pulled off as a waitress to basically be with this guy who's kind of in an elite sort of situation of the world, quickly becomes his muse, quickly becomes the actual person who wears a dress for a moment and an inspiration. But then the movie sort of gives us what happens to the muse when you're no longer like that sort of inspiring figure. And I think it's interesting is the moment that really seems to happen is, of course, when we finally get the backstory with the mother. And the mother really, I think, seems to haunt the kind of underlying relationship, which is, you know, you have this guy whose mother died early, and in any other movie or any other art, that would be the impetus for like why this artist became the artist that they did. This sort of early childhood trauma. It's this sort of Freudian, you know, trope that we're all kind of familiar with. And so what does Alma do but to replace that sort of mode of death, I think, with her own sort of recipe, her own sort of, you know, recipe with the food. It's not just to intrude on this art, but it's to sort of usurp a place. You know, it's literally to be both the wife and the mother in her situation. After all, the mother is, you know, the sort of nurturing figure that we think of. But I mean, she also takes nature, she replaces it with food. She becomes the cook. She becomes sort of his mother. But then, as Connor pointed out, her name Alma also is a reference to sort of the grand trope of nature as mother. And so she's constantly, I think, in her own way, actually breaking down the only woman that he's had in his life that he wants to keep around, in a sense. And that's why it's in the dresses to various degrees.
Right. And definitely she's, you know, explicitly competitive. Every other woman, and part of her initial feeling of why she takes action with the mushrooms is his interest in his preoccupation with, I mean, he's making dresses for other women, right? She gets kind of jealous in some sense. Sometimes I think justifiably, other times not, right? Such as for the princess, who is like, whom he's known since she was like a little girl, right? Seems to be a different kind of relationship. In other cases, they seem to be kind of old flames as well as some of these clients. And certainly her relationship with Cyril. I mean, I think there's the wonderful scene with Dr. Hardy, who himself is like, you know, is a godson of another one of what I think is implied to be one of Reynold Woodcock's, you know, exes. This Dr. Hardy character who shows up, and obviously there's this confusion where he calls Alma Mrs. Woodcock, but then Cyril Reynolds' sister replies, right, and says, "Yes, that's me," right? So they're both, right? So they both compete to kind of be Mrs. Woodcock, right?
I'm just, Anthony, could you kind of retread what you were saying with regards to the food, kind of that last part? I kind of wanted to respond to something.
Yeah, I was saying, I think one thing with Alma and her interest is that the movie seems to be suggesting is that she's constantly trying to defeat or replace or usurp the mother type figures, or the female figures that become the mothers in Reynolds's life. And one of the ways she ultimately does that in the end is to play with like the food and to bring in her nature from the outside, not just because of our usual notion of the mother as the maternal nurturing figure, but to also literally use Mother Nature against it itself, which is to be poisonous. And I think, she plays with that. I mean, the one thing Reynolds has in a mother that she can never take away is, of course, the mother died young. So she has this sort of ghost that she has to battle with. And the way to really do that is to make Reynolds sort of in desperate need of her. She becomes not just the wife or the girlfriend, but the mother herself.
Yeah, it's truly a codependent relationship. Would be one, for the textbooks for sure. And I think, it's curious though, because she espouses the idea that she wants to kind of lose herself in him, but does she truly want that? I mean, isn't there an idea or an element of mutual exclusivity there, where can you at once be someone's kind of conservator, guardian, or whatever, and also their partner? It's a little muddy there. It gets kind of tricky, and I guess ultimately we should perhaps understand that she's fallible, and her intentions don't always align with kind of logical conclusions, I guess.
Right. I mean, I think we can sympathize with Alma in the beginning. Yeah, obviously she's headstrong. She really desperately wants, I think, Reynolds to change in some way for her. Right. That would mean that she means something. That she means something to him. Right. And that's something I think we can all relate to in some way. Just even the token of someone changing for us, right? Something we would value. And I think obviously the fact that Reynolds is so pathologically unwilling to, right, that's so essential to his whole identity, that he has this, again, it's childish. It's kind of being stuck in his ways completely, right? But I think there's something that's, what's really funny about this, watching again, Cyril mentions very early on, or I think it's the chef talking about the mushrooms. A cook mentions how Mr. Woodcock does not like butter very much. He really does not like too much butter. So Alma cooking the asparagus with butter actually is kind of, which you think when you first watch it, you're like, Reynolds, you are crazy that like she deliberately made this asparagus with butter to like torture you. But maybe she like kind of is. She just wants him to eat asparagus with butter once,
Yeah, I think she's trying to prove a point, right? She's like, you made a point of doing the butter, right? Like later she does it with the mushrooms. Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, and there's something interesting about that. But I think Alma, in this sense, is a sort of unsympathetic character. But I think there's no denying that Vicky Creeps brings this kind of like charm to the role. Like, just she's so happy. When she has this look in her eyes. I mean, it's so somehow, she's a person who lives life a lot more than Reynolds does. In some ways, there's a desire to see her get her way. I mean, it's mysterious, but and part of that, I mean, the big argument is that you feel it's justified in some sense based on she's doing a lot of the same things that Reynolds was doing to her, and I think it's fair to say that there's a possibility of a double standard, right? There's ways that he treats her, right, that she kind of returns back to him, and of course, two wrongs don't make it right. But I think the movie's asking us to work on that level.
Sorry to interrupt, Connor.
No,
I was just gonna. I'm just curious what you guys thought. Like, what is the ultimate valence that we're left with, or that's impressed upon us at the end of the film? How are we supposed to appraise this relationship? Obviously, it's literally and figuratively toxic, but like, what are we supposed to understand about this relationship? Is it power gone awry? Is it I'm just a little bit miffed. Like, for me, it's incredibly sad that they can't relate to each other on a healthier level. But do you all relate to that sadness, or do you find it to be more of like, I don't know, more of a kind of a success or a triumph of these two individuals who have kind of found their own way? There's certain elements there. I don't know how I'm supposed to come away from this. Am I supposed to look at this as kind of a disgusting example of intimacy or love, or more of like a nuanced approach where I can understand that there's some positives here, and maybe I'll take those away from it, or what is the valence here? Like,
I think this is an optimistic ending. I think this is a positive ending, and that's how I've always read and how I've understood it. Obviously it is a toxic relationship, and Woodcock is this, toxic person, and, Alma kind of has her own, obviously, toxicity as well, the literal toxicity, as you point out. But I think what my takeaway with the ending is that in relationships, things that are in the inside of relationships that help two people truly be close to one another are things that might not make sense to people outside of it, right? Like, we can say, oh, that's horrible that she's poisoning him, but that's the perfect thing for her to do, because she understood. And this is why he's so happy at the end. This is why he says, kiss me before I'm sick again, is because she was able to figure out exactly what he needed in a way he would have never been able to realize or articulate on his own, because he wants to be that child. He wants to be that baby being held by his mother. And she saw that. She saw that and found a way to make that happen, and prove to him that she truly knows him in a way no other person does, and in a way that his sister never could, right? So that's her ultimate triumph. And I see that as a positive thing, right? I see it as like, these are two people that are flawed, weird people, and the way that we're all flawed and weird people, right? I mean, I've said some of the things Woodcock has said. I mean, I'm not as cruel as Woodcock, certainly, but I can definitely relate to some of his like passive aggression, or some of his like annoyance. He tries to kind of stifle and doesn't do a very good job of it, stuff like that. And these two people were able to find a system that they could be close to each other. So I think it's kind of cool that it's kind of bold for the movie to end this way, the movie to kind of frame this off-putting thing in this kind of positive way. Because at the end of the day, like, who's really getting hurt here? I feel like they're both doing okay. So I don't know.
Yeah, but there's eventually he's just gonna be. I don't know. So this cycle goes on indefinitely. That's my question. I don't know. But did Anthony or Connor? Do you guys feel the same as Tony? Am I out on a limb here?
I think Tony is probably closer to that. That was a very good way, I think, to put the ending for probably the way I think about it, and probably the way I thought about it the first time. But I'm going to do a typical Anthony move here, and also say, I think one of the fundamental misreadings that we've all done is to view the ending of this movie and the relationship like guys. I think we're forgetting, and this is my favorite part of this rewatch, the supernatural vein throughout the movie. And that there's something about this that is essentially the what's the David Foster Wallace quote, Tony? Every love story is a ghost story. Because I think there's a supernatural reign through this, and I think one of the things that she's also doing, Alma, by the end of the movie, is playing with the way that Reynolds is just so afraid of the past. And part of by the time we get to that ending is to realize that these are two characters that just want to live in this sort of present moment, in which they're only existing in a sort of Ouroboros type thing where they take care of each other. Because what's interesting to me, and I'm surprised we only brought this up very briefly, the little notes that he's sewing in, are all these things that are designed to protect him, because he's not just childish is one way to put it, but he's superstitious or supernaturally afraid is another way. And one of the ones he sews is the never cursed one. But I think what's interesting is it's like a 5-minute moment, is that sort of thing which exists to protect him, the fear of his mother's wrath, or the fear of whatever, is broken. And the moment he realizes it's broken is when he collapses on that one wedding dress he thinks is disgusting. And I think that's actually a moment of kind of change that Alma kind of latches onto. And I know we're running out of time, so I won't like go much further into it. But I think by the end of the movie, if we're thinking about this from also the female perspective, feminine perspective, I should say, that there's something there about recognizing yourself in this sort of like gothic, ghostly manner.
It's the yeah, of course, because the feminine is always the no, I get what you're saying. I get what you're saying, Anthony. And in fact, I think you're absolutely right. And it's an angle I had honestly neglected. I have to go back and think about this because we have the moment where, he says, "Oh, this silly when we made the dress, my evil nanny, was superstitious about even touching it. Well, it wouldn't have mattered anyway." You think he's being sort of, coldly rational at that moment, but then at the same time, there's this hanging idea of, well, maybe Cyril was cursed not to get married. Maybe he does actually believe, in these very curses, though I think maybe up for debate, but it's an angle I had never actually explored. So I'm glad of that. And I think it goes to show there's many more things to discover thinking about this movie. Anyway, guys, let's get to the final vote. I want you guys to stick to your guns. I want you guys to go with your guts. Don't feel piety. This is obviously a movie we can battle over. Please, let's hear your final verdicts. Let's go for, I'm thinking Anthony first, who seemed to be the most positive.
Yeah, I think I was probably the most, just based on emotional and vocal reactions, the most into this. I know I gave my alternative theory, but I would just say for Kirk, my last point is rewatching it the second time, the movie that actually kept coming to mind was Crimson Peak. For various reasons. And I got to look, I'm sure someone has written about that, but I saw that movie with Kirk in theaters. That's why I bring it up also. So it's an easy yes. I love this movie. I think I actually might move it up in the ranking of PTAs, but I'm sure we'll do more down the road.
Cool. Thank you, Anthony. How about Kirk next? And Kirk, I don't want you to just throw in the towel. Okay, I want you to give us your real opinion.
I will say this movie would be made infinitesimally better by the idea of one character walking out onto the street at the end of the film, and we realize it's actually like 1996, and like they've just been so insulated, like a Village style, right? Like The Village. How cool would that be? I just think that would be so awesome.
I like that because it's like, why 1996? Like, just like, oh my god, it's 1996.
That's a whole
the score changes to like Sublime, like I don't practice and I don't know, but they might have come after
the street. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll say yes. I don't want to get dragged by historians looking back in this podcast and seeing I voted down a PTA film. I think Age of Innocence is a good comparison. I think 45 Years is a good comparison. And I liked both of those films more than this one. But I think there is something here for me. And I really think a line that resonated with me is towards the end when she's envisioning their future. She says, when I'm older and I can understand you better. I think that's beautiful. And there's something haunting about that. And I do have to think on the Crimson Peak reference or the Crimson Peak comparison for a little bit. But yeah. When I'm older, maybe I'll understand this film a little more. No, I don't know, but I'll give it a yes. And good choice, Connor.
Thank you, Kirk, and thank you for choosing it. And I was really glad to present it to you guys. All right, kiss me, Tony, before I'm sick.
I'm not sure I will, Connor. No, I mean, honestly, I'm really divided on this. I'm really divided on it because, like, I do like this movie, as I've said. I feel like I've definitely cooled on it since the first time I watched it. I think there's a lot of, you guys said a lot of interesting things. I mean, I don't know. It's just like in my 3 viewings with the movie, those flower petals haven't opened up for me in that way, and I'm sure that there's a million ways to like read this movie, but no. I mean, I think it's I like what it is at base. I like everything about it in terms of its aesthetic presentation. I think it's got a good theme. It's got a good, interesting love story, but there's something missing for me. I think, like Kirk said at the beginning, like there's something that keeps it from going into that top tier. It doesn't give me that oomph like I get from There Will Be Blood, for instance, right? To pick just one, right? It doesn't give me that like that X factor. And I don't know if it's because it's more staid, more quiet, more subtle. I don't know. But and to be clear, I definitely like this movie and I would recommend it to anyone who hasn't watched it. It's a must watch. Absolutely go check it out. But since you guys have already voted yes, and I'm don't have quite that same fire, I am going to vote a soft no. But yeah, music is amazing though. Love that score.
Connor, you are
Thank
very
you.
tactful. If you had Tony go second and he voted no, I probably would have voted no. Damn it. Well, the record
Yeah, no, I
stands.
was thinking it would have been more interesting actually to have Kirk go first, and then I could rely on Anthony for the backup. But yes, well, I've played the game well. Everything has turned out exactly as I planned. I got a PTA movie in the 706. I'm glad of it. I'm sure there's more to come, more to watch. Finally, let me just read my favorite line from the film. Right now, I'm just admiring my own gallantry for eating it the way you prepared it. Okay, guys, thank you. Now let's move on to the fan favorite segment where you guys suggest movies and I have to choose which one we're going to watch for the next episode. Anthony, what's your pick? Who's going first?
I'm actually going to go first, and then I'll
Great.
let the other two decide on their own. I'll change it up.
Sure, they seem to be rapidly searching their lists.
No, I've had my movie somewhat picked out. I think so. It's been a long time. I'm going to renominate something because I think it's time that we finally got a PTA one. We're going to do a director he's probably been compared to the most in his career. Although funny enough, Phantom Thread is probably one of the least like this. Is a Robert Altman film. So it's a Western. It's one I nominated before. It's 1971's McCabe and Mrs. Miller, starring Warren Beatty and Julie Christie in the sort of Pacific Northwest town as they sort of try to start a brothel business. And Warren Beatty sort of makes one mistake after the other. It's a sort of revisionist anti-Western. It's brilliantly done. It's the only Robert Altman film I personally have ever responded to at a level that I've had to keep rewatching it for more and more depth. And I think next time is the time for an Altman pick and a time for a Western again. It's been too long. We can't let Little Big Man be the only Western in the canon.
Agreed. It's lonely. It's lonely out there on the plains. Thank you, Anthony. That's a very interesting choice.
I'll
Who
go.
should go?
Yeah,
Oh,
I don't
sure,
have to.
sure.
We don't have to argue over it. Tony
Yeah.
can go last, but I will nominate a film that I quite enjoy, and actually spoke to me in a weird way, like it bridged, like through its aesthetics, it spoke to me, as well as through its story, its plot and general morality. But it's a film by a little known director named Hayao Miyazaki. And that film is, I'm thinking, should I change to I'm committed to the director, but no, I gotta go with Spirited Away. It's a classic. It's about time we did a Miyazaki. I think it's his best one. That's up for debate, of course. Princess Mononoke is pretty close there too. But yeah, long story short, I really love this film. I think it's like, it makes me feel like a kid in certain ways, that it's kind of a reverent, like I have a reverence for it. And I think there'd be really, really great conversations to be had about everything. Literally everything in this movie is worth talking about. And we could do a great action-packed episode about it. So that's my choice.
All right, guys.
Good.
I was when you picked Spirit Away, Kirk, I strongly considered changing mine, and then I was like, no, I'll just do it. He'll have two of these kinds of movies in his lineup this week. And the movie I'm pitching is Perfect Blue by Satoshi Kon. Have any of you seen this? Oh, okay. Oh, great. Anthony's the only one who's seen it. So Satoshi Kon was an anime film director guy, sort of in that, like, Miyazakian esteem level, where he was sort of seen as like the artist, the master, the anime for people who don't like anime, although his films are a lot less sentimental, a lot less based in nature, a lot more about the line between reality and fiction and kind of like cerebral. That's more his style. So Perfect Blue is probably his most famous, I would say. It's like about a pop singer who starts to have this kind of weird break from reality, and she's being stalked. There's this violence happening. It's a kind of a weird, dreamlike, very like Mulholland Drive, like a very Mulholland Drive kind of anime. Visual aesthetics, incredibly cool. Music, incredibly cool. Just really slick, great 90s piece of animation. And then I think it'll be a great choice for the podcast.
Oh my goodness, you guys. This is tough because these are all very strong picks. And in fact, to be frank with you, I felt it in my guts that it was time to do a little Japanimation for the podcast. So this is funny that now I have two choices, which makes it a lot harder. If it had just been Kirk suggesting it, I think it would have gone right for Kirk. But then again, I could just say screw you to both of them, not have to make a tough decision, go with McCabe and Mrs. Miller. I don't know, guys. Help me decide. Please rebut and do not hold back.
This is interesting. Okay, well, Tony's film and the director's other one, Paprika, I feel like kind of came back in the spotlight because they were big influences on like Inception, The Matrix, and what's the other Darren Aronofsky film? One with Jennifer Connelly.
Pie?
No, not Pie.
Well, I think I saw a Twitter thread about this. Like, there's a lot of shots he's straight up lifted out of his movies. I mean, in every one, like Black Swan's a big one. There's a lot of shots in Black Swan that are just lifted from this movie.
Yeah, so that's interesting. I think, we'll all have enough knowledge to really pull things out. I think it's an interesting film. Kirk's movie, Spirits Away, I absolutely love it. So it'd be an easy yes or ready from the moment. Every time I see that scene where she's on the train with no face, I get a little choke up in my heart, and I'm a 12-year-old boy seeing it in theaters again. Oh God. So, it's a wonderful movie to see. Okay. But McCabe and Mrs. Miller, it's a different choice here. It's obviously the different choice. Don't let it become my Mishima would be my easy rebuttal. But, just like it's been time for some Japanimation, it's time for a Western, Connor. And McCabe and Mrs. Miller might be the one to do it. I would argue better than Mickey 1, better than Bonnie and Clyde. This is Warren Beatty's definitive performance. It's absolutely fantastic. And the easy influence on things like Deadwood, The Sopranos, it's just so clear. There's so many lines we could go with here. So that'd be my, of course, recommendation.
I don't know how to adequately describe the film I'm offering here. I feel like anything I say is kind of is insufficient, right? And we all know, and we all have that kind of baggage. I feel like we carry or have with us that we've upon seeing this film, and I think there is something to be said about kind of a tried and true classic, interrogating it. There's some recognition there with the director, with the film itself. We can kind of go a little bit deeper and look at the genre or look at the time frame, I guess, more aptly, and also contrast his other works. And really, I don't know. It's just so beautiful that I want to be with Chihiro again on the train. I want to be in the baths. I want to experience it again. But Pepsi Blue, the movie, sounds great. It was a great flavor when it came out, early 2000s. I was with it. Sad they discontinued it. And yeah, so if we go that route, that's fine. And then, Anthony's... I'm fine with I've said this before, but I don't like any movies that have long titles because I would feel awkward saying the name to the guy at the box office. So I will vote against Anthony's for that reason alone. I think movies should be like 3 syllables. All right. Even though Spirited Away is like 5. So anyways.
Sure.
Then I win, Kirk. You realize you've set up a scenario where I have to win because I have the shortest title by far. So I would say for mine, yes, I agree. Japanimation. It's time to do an anime film. While yes, Little Big Man is lonely, but we do have Little Big Man. We at least have one revisionist Western. We don't have any anime. So I think for the novelty alone, that's a strong argument in favor. I would say this: Spirited Away, a true banger, a true classic, a true masterpiece. It is a sentimental place in my heart, and I do hope that one day we will do a Spirited Away episode. However, I do think I would give Perfect Blue the edge in terms of a better episode because it's a little bit more niche. It's a little bit more cool. Spirited Away is kind of the most obvious anime pick you could go with, right? Not that I love it. I love that movie, but I think it's the most obvious to go with. Perfect Blue is a little bit not obvious. And I think it's a movie that lends itself to discussion. And I'm just excited. We've all seen Spirited Away. You guys haven't seen Perfect Blue, and I'm really excited for you guys to watch it.
My goodness, guys, this is a tough decision because all of these really speak to me. Obviously, I mentioned my bias towards feeling something in the air that we need to enter the world of animation. Long overdue to suggest Miyazaki, of course, right? McCabe and Mrs. Miller, I have seen. And I love Anthony's reasoning that we need another Western. And it's so true, we do need another Western. And it's the kind of thing that I should be the champion of based on my own interests. And me, and from that period, the early 70s, Warren Beatty, I like him as well. And I agree with your assessment of performance, Anthony. I have to say, it's a film that spoke more to my mind, and it did not really speak to my heart. Obviously, there's a place for that. There's a place for that on the podcast, but I'm going to eliminate it for that reason. I'm sorry to make it into your Mishima. I suggest you give it another shot. I would not be opposed to watching another time, but the ghost of anime cries out for recognition here, which leaves us with Perfect Blue and Spirited Away. Of course, now that I'm in the anime mood, right, I'd be more inclined to go towards the real stuff, not the stuff that any girl knows about, as Tony was suggesting, but the real niche stuff, the real stuff like Perfect Blue. But Spirited Away, I mean, that being said, I mean, there's something in Spirited Away. I feel a little bit of recoil about it for this nostalgic film that we watched. I think most of us were pretty young when it came out. And it was kind of one of the first sort of this look at this cool Japanese movie. It's really, but it's deep, man. And it's I have this weird feeling about it, that it feels like I'm regressing a little bit if I return to Spirited Away. Well, maybe that's exactly what the movie is trying to do. Maybe that's part of its whole MO, that I have those feelings about it. And I also have seen it before. Perfect Blue, on the other hand, and Satoshi Kon in general would be prime for my interests of revisiting some of the classic anime, and certainly the kind of 90s cool anime, which is stuff that I've not explored to a great extent, which would make me inclined very much towards Perfect Blue, but that's not even the one that I want to watch the most, Satoshi Kon. For that reason, guys, I'm going to meet us all in the middle, okay? And I'm going to go for Spirited Away because I think it can make us all happy.
I thought you were going to choose McCabe and Mrs. Miller at the end.
And I can have, that would be cool to come back and revive McCabe and Mrs. Miller. But we're going to go for Spirited Away. And not only to have the reservation about the kind of kiddiness of it, which is not very kiddie, right? But there's something about it to me that, unlike some of his other films, doesn't have as much meat to it. There's this weird kind of nostalgia that surrounds it. I guess what I'm saying is that it's overhyped because of our nostalgia, I guess is what I would say. That'd be my inclination. So I already have kind of a bone to pick, but I'm really eager to watch it again and to revisit my feelings of having watched it.
And here's the thing, Connor. I first saw Spirited Away, full disclosure, when I was 29 or 30 years old. So it's almost as if I'm 14. And you're going to talk to your own nostalgia. You're going to argue with your own nostalgia. So that's cool. What's going to happen. That's
cool. I like that, Kirk. So I think obviously you guys also, you complimented the movie as well. It has a place in our hearts. Let's not shy away, though. Of course, I think the 706, the bread and butter, is the niche. Have you heard of this kind of film? It's always good to revisit just a classic, something that's kind of an agreed upon standard. Everyone's got an opinion on it kind of movie. So I think Spirited Away, for people of our generation, I think is one of those. So let's do it. Guys, I really look forward to the next episode to discuss it with you. Anthony, could you bring us out here?
I'll have what she's having.